Alright, so May is now in full swing, and I have to say there are a lot of interesting games coming out in May. I wouldn't say there's a ton of AAA fare for the Steam Deck specifically, but when I looked at a lot of the games that were coming out in May, I was like, man, there's a lot of really interesting, indie titles that are dropping, and I'm very excited to explore some of those. But, as is routine, before I get too far into all of the new stuff that's coming out, what I wanted to do first was do a video about the games that I picked up in April. And the one that I wanted to start with is a game that I did actually already beat on the PlayStation 4 previously. It was my Game of the Year in 2019, and it was actually part of the humble choice for April, so I was really excited to see it because I really wanted to try it out on the Steam Deck, and that is Death Stranding. From Hideo Kojima, Death Stranding has you stepping into the occasionally robot-assisted boots of Sam Porter Bridges. Set in a desolate, post-apocalyptic version of the United States that looks weirdly like Iceland a lot of the time, it's your job to make deliveries and gradually reconnect the disparate portions of the country by linking them up together on the chiral network. But along the way, you'll have to contend with a range of challenges, whether that's the terrain itself, or some more supernatural obstacles that tend to get in your way. And pretty much the whole time, you will have a ghost-detecting baby that is in a jar strapped to your chest. Now if that sounds just super bizarre, I can assure you that it definitely is. The game is effectively a AAA indie where Kojima had a massive budget to build something that was 100% spec to his vision, and it's a personal favorite of mine for a reason. Even though delivering packages doesn't sound very fun on the surface, I promise you once all of these systems really come together, it's incredibly fulfilling if you're willing to stick with it. Plus, beyond the raw survival of rough terrain and more harrowing threats, you also have to think about Sam's emotional well-being to a degree, and, well, I won't spoil much here, but suffice it to say it is an odd game for sure, but a deeply human one. And it really is so much more than just the Gran Turismo of walking simulators, as Tim Rogers so eloquently put it. On the deck, it performs reasonably well at its default settings. It's not as gorgeous as what I played on the PS5, but it's still a very detailed world to explore. Frame rate is kind of all over the place, wavering between the 40s and 50s, so it'd probably be best to lock this one down to 40 FPS with a 40Hz refresh rate, and maybe disable depth of field or motion blur if you really want to keep things steady. But still, it is kind of amazing that a game this massive that's only a few years old at this point can run comfortably on a handheld. And I figured since I've already finished this game, it really couldn't hurt to re-explore it more into the handheld form factor for some chill open world exploration. Now next up is a game that I was always curious to play, and I feel like I either saw physical copies of this, or maybe I just saw artwork for what was like one of those digital copies that you kind of buy in person at GameStop, and I always wanted to try it, but for whatever reason I just always passed on it, and that is West of Dead. West of Dead is a top-down, procedurally generated twin-stick shooter that's set in the Old West of Purgatory, Wyoming in 1888. If you've played a roguelite before, you'll have a pretty good idea of what to expect here. Procedurally generated levels, weapons, buffs, and progression that can feel like kind of a slow crawl at first, but then dole out some pseudo-permanent rewards to keep you fighting through just one more run. You'll be playing as William Mason, a man who's awoken in Purgatory and is trying to find his way east of the light, but with every failure you'll wind up right back at the beginning of the floor of an unsettling saloon before beginning your journey anew. Now at first I wasn't sure how I'd feel about this one because in stark contrast to games like Dead Cells or Binding of Isaac or Hades, West of Dead has a much slower pace. Not like Red Dead 2 slow, but it's definitely a genre entry that requires a bit more consideration. You'll want to make good use of cover to safely reload your weapons, and enemies in the dark can't be targeted, so you'll need to pick your opportunities carefully as you clear room after room. While the art style is certainly striking with a darker use of cell shading, the music and occasional voice acting really makes West of Dead stand out among its peers. Because really there's no shortage of games like this, but even though West of Dead feels really familiar, it also has some unique perks that make it feel really distinct. Deck performance is butter smooth from the jump, and for portable play this genre's pretty much already a no-brainer, so I'm looking forward to spending more time with West of Dead, particularly since I've now cleared at least one of its bosses, and I'm really warming up to its more tactical pop-and-stop approach to combat, which really is not something you see very often in this genre. But hey, while we're on the subject of dark, moody, pseudo-cartoonish, procedurally generated roguelite adventures, wow that's a lot to say, this next one is a game I did already have for the Nintendo Switch as a physical copy, but since it was on sale for like $3.99, I really couldn't pass up the opportunity to get it again and play it on the Steam Deck, and that is Darkest Dungeon. Darkest Dungeon has you managing a variety of heroes to explore the dungeons haunting the estate that you've inherited. It definitely has a Lovecraftian bent to it, but essentially you'll be managing your party not only to make sure that they're positioned correctly to deal with all the threats that you encounter on your adventure, but you also have to manage the stress of your individual heroes. That's because the more you subject your party members to unimaginable horrors and the rigors of combat, the more afflictions they will gain that will just completely hamper their progress. All of this happens against a gorgeous hand-drawn world that technically is not cel-shaded, I suppose, but it is strikingly fun to look at. Everything from moving your party carefully through a new room or hallway to the meaty impact sounds of combat feel fantastic in this game, and it's a real testament to what a large role things like sound design and animation can play in making an experience memorable. And I think that's especially commendable since this is a turn-based RPG, and while I think those can come off a bit dry sometimes, Darkest Dungeon is anything but. Everything about it feels thoroughly rich, and it's no wonder that 2 million copies later, it's getting a sequel later this month, so if you've never tried it out for yourself before, now would be a great time to give it a go. Well, provided you don't mind a more complex sort of RPG, because there's a lot of depth in Darkest Dungeon. So if you're looking for an easy-to-digest game, this might not be your jam, but if you're looking for a more cerebral experience with a lot of technical depth and careful choices to manage, Darkest Dungeon will give you exactly what you're looking for. Next up, getting a little bit lighter in tone, is a game that I had on my wish list and I kind of kept an eye on for a really long time, just because it looked really cartoony and kind of over the top and kind of Scott Pilgrim-ish in a way, but for whatever reason I just never took the leap, and as it turns out, it was part of the offerings in Humble Choice in March, but I didn't really redeem it or get around to playing it until April, and that is Demon Turf. Demon Turf is a 3D action-adventure game in an open world that is not too dissimilar to the 3D action platformers of yesteryear. You'll be playing as Beebs, a young demon girl who travels between different worlds called turfs, with each one being split up into separate levels. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time with this one yet, although I do think it shows a lot of promise, at least mechanically. On the visual front, I gotta give it props because it's definitely unique in so much as it's just not very common to see a 3D sort of cel-shaded world that then has a sort of 2D character that sort of rotates around it in a very, I don't know, I guess Paper Mario sort of way. And as much as I can praise that style for being unique, I can't quite decide if it resonates with me just yet. Sometimes I think it looks really good, and then other times it looks a little bit awkward and off-putting to me. But I can't deny Beebs' platforming chops, and I have to say she's every bit as maneuverable as a lot of other heroes that I've played in 3D platformers. I'm not quite sure that she reaches the level of finesse as a Mario 3D outing, but it is definitely solid. And having played a few platformers recently in this vein in that video I did a while back where I talked about games that look like PS1 games for your Steam Deck, I'm definitely curious to spend a little bit more time with it, even if I do find that visual style to be a little bit more off-putting than appealing, at least at the moment. And from what I've played so far on the Steam Deck, I'm not sure that you would really want to modify much of the graphics options because everything out of the box seemed to work just fine, but yeah, if you are looking for a quirky, offbeat 3D platformer, it might at least be worth investigating, particularly if you're a fan of, you know, more comic booky heroes in the vein of something like Scott Pilgrim. And finally, the last game that I picked up was one that I really just rolled the dice on because I had no idea if it was going to be good or not. It just sort of popped up as a recommended entry when I was on the Steam store one day, and that is I Am Fish, which apparently is a sequel to a game called I Am Bread, which I've never played before, so I'm not really sure if I'm missing out on something by not having played I Am Bread first, but I'm pretty sure I did notice a kind of a cheeky nod to that game in the opening portion of I Am Fish. But anyways, I Am Fish has you stepping into the role of a goldfish who quickly becomes separated from his friends. And while visually it certainly looks like a Pixar movie, it looks like it's wearing its influences on its sleeve pretty clearly here. Now, at least in my initial time with I Am Fish, I kind of figured that you would just mostly be swimming and it would be kind of an open world ocean exploration game. However, right after the game sort of kicks off and really sets up the story, it felt a lot more like a monkey ball game, which I was not expecting. And for the most part, I would say it's doing a great job of maintaining that lighter tone if that's what you're after, at least until you roll your fishbowl from too far a height and come crashing down to the floor, which will, of course, kill you. And at least in my initial, again, very limited time playing I Am Fish, I will say that it controls well enough. I don't think it's quite as precise as what I ever got from playing a monkey ball game before, but at the very least, I'm glad to see that checkpoints are pretty generous in this game, and I'm expecting it will not be a very long game. I just can't imagine this game is going to be like some 40-hour sprawling epic. Rather, what I'm expecting is a lighthearted, kind of like 5 to 6 hour adventure, and I'm fairly certain that's what I Am Fish is going to provide. Deck performance wasn't really exceptional or anything. It did seem to waver a lot, somewhere between the 30s, and then it would kind of dip below that in some cases, although to be fair, at this point I haven't done a ton of optimization for it yet, so there may be some tweaks that you can make to make sure it performs better, but at least initially it's not, you know, the best performing game out of the ones that I picked up in April in terms of just like a, you know, load it up and go experience for the Steam Deck. But considering I got it at a discount, and again, I'm a huge fan of games that just kind of serve as palate cleansers between more, you know, meaty experiences, I think I'm going to have some fun with I Am Fish, and I am going to dive back into it at one point. No aquatic pun intended. Alright, and that's it for this one. Not every game that I picked up in April, but you know, just some of the more notable titles that I was kind of excited to explore, capture some footage for, and kind of give you an idea of how they play on the Steam Deck. So, hey, what about you? Did you grab anything particularly great in April? If so, please let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to hang out here on the channel. It means a ton to me. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one.